Hey guys, welcome back in. I want to start this episode off in an atypical fashion and have you listen to an excerpt from a novel in which I've been slogging my way through over the past few months. I came across a random passage in that novel that I think's um, very topical for the subject matter that we discuss on the show. So here it is. Check it out.
From Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. An electronic machine can carry out mathematical calculations, remember historical facts, play chess, and translate books from one language to another. It is able to solve mathematical problems more quickly than man, and its memory is faultless. Is there any limit to progress, to its ability to create machines in the image and likeness of man? It seems the answer is no. It is not impossible to imagine the machine of future ages and millennia. It will be able to listen to music and appreciate art. It will even be able to compose melodies, paint pictures, and write poems. Is there a limit to its perfection? Can it be compared to man? Will it surpass him? Childhood memories, tears of happiness, the bitterness of parting, love of freedom, feelings of pity for a sick puppy, nervousness, a mother's tenderness, thoughts of death, sadness, friendship, love of the weak, sudden hope, a fortunate guess, melancholy, unreasoning joy, sudden embarrassment. The machine will be able to recreate all of this. But the surface of the whole earth will be too small to accommodate this machine. This machine, whose dimensions and weight will continually increase as it attempts to reproduce the peculiarities of mind and soul of an average, inconspicuous human being. Fascism annihilated tens of millions of people.
Okay, so that last line may have thrown you off. Fascism has annihilated millions of people, but it'll make sense in a second. So, again, that's from a book called Life and Fate by a guy named Vasily Grossman, and I've been working my way through that novel the past few months. It's a bear, I will say. But when I came across this passage, I sort of stopped dead in my tracks because this novel was written in 1950, middle of 1950s. So it's amazing to me how folks like Vasily Grossman, the author, can be so prophetic or paint a picture as clear as what you just heard about the future. Now, to be completely reductionistic, this particular novel is about life under totalitarianism in Russia during World War II. Grossman, he was a trained chemical engineer who became a writer and journalist, and he was on the ground reporting during the Battle of Stalingrad. So the story we see in his novel is largely a fictionalized account of that experience. And just a side note, how the novel came to see the light of day is in itself a fascinating story. The novel doesn't paint a glowing picture of Russia, and the state of Russia during that time went to great lengths to erase the novel from history, but it found its way out nonetheless. So, what do we make of this prophecy on the future of computing? I mean, computers were certainly in existence in 1959 or whenever this novel was written. I mean, Alan Turing and his team helped defeat the Nazis with computational code breaking. IBM was already a company at this point, so there was some precedent. But to see the future the way Vasily Grossman saw it in that passage is still astonishing. Now, I don't even know why this passage was in that book about 1940s Russia. I mean, it's hard to make sense of it at first glance, but I think his point is that fascism or totalitarianism, as he experienced it in Russia, was such an ever-present and oppressive apparatus, which he highlighted by saying in the final line, fascism annihilated tens of millions of people. And computers or the machine will one day become equally as oppressive or ubiquitous. Now, I am obviously leaving out something about the arrival of nuclear technology, especially when we consider 1940s, 1950s Russia, but I think the point remains. In any case, or in many ways, we're not far from the picture that Vasily Grossman painted in that passage in Life and Fate. So it's a great novel. I'd highly recommend it. But let's move on. So today, here at the end of 2024, we're going to freewheel a bit and talk about some of the larger trends of AI that we're seeing, what we're discounting and what we're probably focusing too much on, and what we can expect in 2025. And I'll also answer a few questions that have been hanging out there for a while and hopefully not leave you fully depressed heading into the new year. And I did opt to not publish this episode pre-Christmas in order to, in an effort to not make the Christmas season depressing for anybody, because this episode, it's not very optimistic. I mean, there are some optimistic points that we'll highlight, but in any case, let's dive in. All right. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've seen in the news over the past few weeks or month the concerning amount of drones that started to be seen over, I think it started in New Jersey, and then has spread to several other places across the country. Now, I don't think we know at this point definitively what the sources of those drones are. The State Department has come out and said that these are not foreign drones, or they don't belong to foreign powers or states. So I think we can be comforted by that, maybe. I don't know. But we're told that these drones that we're seeing are permissible under law, but local and state officials are singing a bit of a different tune. And I'm not here to wax on what these drones may or may not be, but to point out that this, I think, is a drop in the bucket of what's headed our way. I think the future of drone technology, we're just seeing the start of it. So back in the first few episodes of the show, I highlighted a story from Kai-Fu Lee's book in which he illustrated the future of drones. And the example that sticks out at me from that passage is that he said drones will one day paint our houses. So that seems like a stretch 2 years ago, I guess now, or close to 2 years ago, that we were nowhere near that. And it does seem like science fiction. But since that time, I've seen drones being tested to clean or pressure wash the sides of buildings, and various other applications like that, industrial applications. So I don't think we're that far away from what Kai-Fu Lee was predicting as drone technology continues to become more sophisticated. So in any case, unless legislation limits in some way, drones are going to be a heavy part of life in the very near future. And over the last few months, Amazon received approval from the FAA to test new delivery drones. So there are a couple of spots around the country that Amazon's already testing delivery drones. There was a great podcast from the guys at Hard Fork about drone delivery from Amazon. They actually went to an Amazon facility, saw the drone delivery process. They placed an order, went to a suburban house and saw it delivered. And there were a ton of questions asked there. I think they had the VP of drone air delivery on that podcast, and he was obviously all positive about drone delivery and what it looks like in the future. If I remember correctly, he said there are currently about 60,000 or 70,000 items that are available for drone delivery. So obviously you can't get a case of water delivered by drone because it's too heavy, but you can get other items, obviously makeup, deodorant, that sort of thing, delivered via drone if you need it to. And they tout it as, if you want this, you can have it in an hour. You pay an extra fee, and you can have it at your house within 2 hours, which is a remarkable feat. He also went on to say that they hope to, or I guess I should say first that he said that Amazon only anticipates 10% of their business or deliveries in the long term to be delivered by drones. So that 90% would stay on the ground, but 10% will be delivered by drones. And they hope by 2029 to have 500 million deliveries a year via air. So what does that look like? If we have Amazon alone delivering 500 million packages a year, what do our skies look like? Especially in urban or suburban settings, how many drones are we going to see flying around? I don't know. I guess we could do, 500 million divided by the days of the year, see how many that is per day to get some sort of breakdown on it. But it seems like a lot. And that's only Amazon. So it seems like the sky with Amazon alone and 500 million deliveries a year, that the sky would be not saturated with drones, but full of drones. But then you try to account for the rest of delivery that's needed or will be implemented from other companies, Amazon's competitors or restaurants. If you want a hot meal delivered from your favorite fast food restaurant and that's available via drone, then how many drones are going to be in the sky? It seems like it will be saturated with drones. In any case, this VP of Amazon said that they plan to take this air drone delivery to scale in 2025 and beyond. So we should start seeing this roll out across the country over the next year. And then it'll also be taken internationally, obviously. So just drone delivery will be a huge part of what we experience in our day-to-day life. And I think, at first it's going to be, the novelty will be there and it'll be this odd thing. And then it'll just sort of wear off. But, if you've got drones coming into your neighborhood every few minutes and you're trying to enjoy your backyard, now drones are not silent. I mean, they're not loud necessarily, depending on how advanced the technology is. But I don't know. It seems too invasive. If a drone's flying over my house to deliver my neighbor a package, is that drone taking video of my house, or my backyard? I mean, they may say they're not, but who knows if they are or not in any case. So probably the most concerning example of drone technology and use is in warfare or combat. And depending on which corner of the internet you inhabit, if you follow any current conflicts across the globe, you don't have to look very far to see drones are a major tool in combat. Now, they've been around forever, obviously, and in use for decades. But now they're so cheap and sophisticated and mass-produced that militaries are starting to use them at scale. And what a horrible end to have to face. I mean, you can see videos on the internet in which drones are hunting down Russian or Ukrainian troops. Now, I imagine if you're lucky enough to survive the wars of today and tomorrow, that the sound of drones alone will probably be the biggest trigger or driver of PTSD amongst veterans. I mean, how horrifying to hear the sound of a drone and to know there's next to nothing you can do to stop it. Very little you can do to stop it. So there's also a podcast I listen to from The Telegraph in the UK. You can look it up. It's called Ukraine from The Telegraph. And they essentially have a day-by-day podcast on what's happening, what's the current state of affairs in the war in Ukraine. And so I check that podcast out periodically, look at the headlines or, what's being featured on the podcast and listen to it if I have, the bandwidth. So on the podcast within the last few weeks, a Ukrainian National Guard Brigade spokesman came out and stated that what may be the first ever all-robot offensive using both flying and crawling drones happened in an offensive in Kharkiv, Ukraine. So the spokesman said that offensive comprised dozens of units of unmanned weapons on a small section of the front. And they phrased it as all-robot combined operation. So that's pretty wild to think about, an all-robot, all-autonomous attack offensive. I mean, that seems like sci-fi. Now, in this particular case, I think this is probably a necessity for Ukraine as they're having shortages of manpower or bodies for the war. So This is probably born out of necessity more than tactics, but it could be a combination of both. So, but I think it is significant for two reasons. And one is that it may be the first of its kind in the future of warfare. And second, is that it correlates to other industries, especially if there is a manpower shortage. So just like I said, if you don't have the manpower, you implement technologies to bridge that gap. And that's what the Ukrainian military is doing. And so for right now, it's drones. But, obviously this can be applied to factories or retail jobs or anything like that. So if you have a shortage of personnel, you find a technology that can do that, you need less personnel. And obviously that's a big theme of this podcast. Drones for a second. One of the more notable technology companies over the past year that I've been following is a company called Palantir. Palantir is at the time, they're not a NVIDIA, obviously, or Tesla at this point, but they are on the up and coming. And I think you're going to hear that name steadily over the next few years. And they specialize in data mining and analytics, and their technology is used across all industries, including the military. But they just released a commercial over the last few weeks that shows the future of drones or drone swarms, and it's about as dystopic as you can imagine. And it's not a big leap to get from, military applications to non-military applications. But I'll link to that commercial from Palantir in the show notes, and you can watch it. It's super short, but I think it'll give you some idea of the future of drones in warfare and combat and what that will look like. And it makes you feel very small when you see this. I guess, on one hand, it's great that drones are fighting and not humans, but it's hard to see that and not go to a dark place when you think about our future. I should also note that local police departments are already using drones, in their local municipalities. If someone calls 911 and reports a burglary, drones can be deployed to locations within seconds, minutes, to provide surveillance while police could be minutes behind. And this can obviously help capture criminals and increase security for everyone. But again, there's a fine line between security and a military industrial complex or mass surveillance, which is our next topic. So the more prevalent drones become, the more our privacy erodes. Call me old-fashioned, but I still view privacy as a positive thing. But what happens when, every drone in the sky is constantly feeding video or pictures, some sort of data back to its company's servers? I feel like there needs to be some, legislation around this. But let's pivot away from drones to facial recognition for a minute. So this current NFL season, all NFL stadiums implemented facial recognition technology in their stadiums. And you can bet more entities, Major League Baseball, NBA, are going to follow suit. As municipalities implement this technology, it's going to be hard to escape facial recognition, especially in urban or suburban settings. Also, over the past few weeks, I saw a demo of some smart glasses. In this particular demo, a guy walked up to a random lady on the street, and while talking to her, he was able to look up her image online, and while having that conversation with her, found all of her background information. Now, that seems like a major invasion of privacy and obviously a safety concern. But those glasses, and that technology will be ubiquitous fairly soon. We already carry our phones everywhere. And as the hardware catches up with the software, it will be difficult to find a corner of the world that's not being recorded. And there will be very few places you can hope to remain anonymous. Obviously, as far as cities are concerned, facial recognition will be implemented as a safety mechanism, regardless of your concerns for privacy. Going one step further, there's a new documentary on HBO Max called Surveilled, which highlights mass surveillance tools. Probably the most well-known is a spyware called Pegasus. It's been highlighted in the news over the past few years in various cases, but it essentially allows whatever entity that pays for Pegasus from the provider the ability to target individual smartphones. They can fully access your smartphone remotely and take all of your information or simply listen to whatever you're saying. Now, this is being used by governments at the moment to combat terrorism, but how long until it's used on folks not anywhere near terrorism? I mean, you go from terrorism to terrorism adjacent to an innocent person with a relative involved in some, questionable activities. If all you have is a hammer, everything eventually looks like a nail. And I can't imagine, this ending well. So having talked about all of this, or hearing myself saying it out loud, maybe this idea that we still even have any semblance of privacy is an illusion. And I can see the emails coming in now saying that, your smartphone tracks your every move already. So what does it matter if your face is on record? And that's true to some extent, but, it feels like we're giving up something. And for now, it looks like the human mind will be the last frontier for privacy, but who knows for how long. And to be fair, as I'm thinking through this, we've largely given up this privacy for the convenience of information, without any thoughts to privacy. So maybe there's, nobody to blame but ourselves. So, what's happened over the last few weeks and months? Well, Google announced a quantum computing breakthrough that's hard to fathom. Their quantum computer needs less than 5 minutes to perform mathematical calculations that the world's most powerful supercomputers couldn't complete in 10 septillion years. I don't know what a septillion years is, but that seems impressive. I'm far too ignorant on quantum computing to explain the significance of that, but it seems self-evident. If the name of the game is compute and data, that seems like it could break things open. Also, just over the past few days, OpenAI demoed their O3 reasoning model. It's brand new, and I haven't had time to really look into it. But folks I follow and trust in the field are astonished by its ability. I mean, at this point, you can essentially have a PhD level expert in your pocket almost any subject, and that's wild. So there are others who say that, large language models have hit a wall. Perhaps that's true, but even if they have hit a wall, we know the capabilities that come from the large language models as we have them now will change the future significantly. So if there's no improvement beyond the large language models we have at this current moment, the changes brought by that technology as it stands today will transform most of what we know. So in tech news, outside of the few stories I just highlighted, agents have been the story of the last few weeks and months. And agents will be the name of the game in 2025. Tech companies are rushing to sell their AI in the form of agents to corporations. So if you're unfamiliar with agents, please refer to our previous episodes. I'll play you a smattering of clips from some folks. First up is Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic. Have a listen to what he says here.
If we get to the point where, AI is, kind of past the professional level at most tasks, and we're able to build millions of these systems, you could think of this as, you might describe it as, a country of geniuses in a data center. And that's a bizarre situation, right? Civilization has never been in that situation before. What happens when that's, you just instantly invent everything that could be invented? And I give a bunch of reasons why I don't think it'll go that way. But what I do think could happen is that if we look at, the next 100 years of what we are trying to invent in science and engineering, perhaps all of that could happen in 5 or 10 years. And because I used to be a biologist, I focused particularly on the biology side of things, on biomedical discoveries, ranging from academics to biotech companies to large pharma companies. And I think there's really, potential to conquer many of the afflictions we still face, right? A lot of the easy ones, like diseases that were addressed by sanitation or vaccination or antibiotics, we've solved. but things like cancer and Alzheimer's disease, much more complicated. And so I'm wondering if AI is really what we need to understand that complexity and to surmount those diseases, frankly, much faster than I think most of us are imagining. We're getting used to a world where those diseases are very hard to address and progress is very slow. I don't think it needs to be that way. I think if we get it right, these incurable diseases we could actually overcome, and we'll look back at them the way we look back at bubonic plague or mumps.
And I think what he says here, is, on the face of it, pretty understandable that AI, when you can run a million experiments simultaneously at the same time, if you have enough data centers to pull that off, you're going to be able to solve cancer a lot faster than you would otherwise. So in that regard, AI is going to be very beneficial. But having the ability to do so is going to have implications, obviously, on people who perform those things. Maybe not on the front end so much, but the further we get down this road, the more impact you're going to see in that regard. Second up is Sam Altman of OpenAI. I've got 3 clips I'll run back to back in which he's talking about agents, essentially, and where we're at and where we're going to be in the next year or so.
As its capabilities go up, maybe right now you can give it a 5-second task without supervision. And eventually you give it a 5-minute task, and then a 5-hour task, and then a 5-day task. And maybe someday it can go to a 5-month task, and that's like a full scientist off exploring something. But I think it'll feel more like that. It'll feel more like an increasingly senior coworker. Not one moment it was not autonomous, and then one moment it was.
Agents are the thing everyone is talking about, I think for good reason. This idea that you can give an AI system a pretty complicated task, like a kind of task you'd give to a very smart human that takes a while to go off and do and use a bunch of tools and create something of value. That's the kind of thing I'd expect next year. And that's like a huge deal. We talk about that like, this thing is going to happen. But that's like, if that works as well as we hope it does, that can really transform things.
People will lose jobs. Yeah. Many new jobs will be created, I think much better jobs. We feel a responsibility to educate society as we see it. We'll be right about some things, wrong about others, and to be as good as we can at being stewards of this technology. But, not everyone's going to like all of the impacts, but this is coming. This is this is a scientific achievement of humanity that is going to get embedded in everything we do. The definition of work changes. Someone that lived thousands of years ago that was trying to be like a subsistence farmer probably would look at what you and I do now and say, that's not really work, they're just having fun. I think it will be so clear once these robots are off doing all of these other things that there's some special human things, and we don't really care about that much what those robots do, in the same way that we don't care that much about the machines and factories making stuff for us. Right. But we'll find stuff to do that we really care about.
So there you go. You're going to have a senior coworker with you. That was the first clip. Second clip was agents are going to be a very big thing in 2025. And lastly, we're going to force the issue. And, jobs are going to be lost because this is a scientific breakthrough and things will be better on the other side. So I think I would say that based on what we've heard from Sam Altman over the past few years since ChatGPT was released into the wild, was that he had a very optimistic view of the future, or at least he presented himself as optimistic about the future. I think he still does to some extent, but as it relates to jobs, this is a more sober take from Sam Altman that, hey, jobs are going to be lost and not everybody's going to like this. So, that was a bit different to hear from him. But I think it's true. I think he needs to be speaking as plainly as possible so people should know what's coming. But I think, again, agents will be the song that's sung in 2025 by these tech companies. Every tech company right now is touting AI agents. I think his name is Mark Benioff. He's the CEO of Salesforce, and he is pushing agents big time at Salesforce. Now, Salesforce is a CRM, an internal software that many corporations use to do their everyday operations, purchasing, that sort of thing. And he is pushing agents big time. I mean, he's tweeting out how much more efficient they are at Salesforce because they're using agents, how much faster their customer service calls are because they're using agents. And he is a believer. I guess he has to be because he went all in on agents. But, if agents improve over the course of 2025 as much as they have in 2024, and corporations begin to implement agents into their workflows, and I do have, or you do have, a agent helping you in your job is going to change drastically. You are going to become much more efficient because you're going to have this agent doing things for you, or these agents doing things for you. I don't know exactly what that looks like. It depends on your job and what you do. But if it is as advertised, your workload is going to get much lighter. And they'll say, that the constant refrain is that that'll make you or free you up to be able to focus on more high value or high targeted task that you can work on. But my question there is, can't agents do that too? I mean, why just have the agents work on the simple exercises? Maybe that's all they can do up front. But eventually, this technology, as Sam Altman said, is going to become better and better, and you're going to be able to send it off to do a 5-day task versus a 5-minute task. And eventually the human becomes redundant in that scenario. So I guess a lot depends on how quickly companies implement this technology over the next year or two. So just personally at my company, the corporation I work for, I would say is a mid-sized American corporation, still working to trying to get Copilot implemented across the company. So it's no small thing to get this technology implemented at your company. So it could take some time. But, it's not crazy to think that by the end of 2025, people are going to be using these technologies, these agents in their everyday workflow. And the only question after that is how long before people are made redundant in that work? I don't know. Sam Altman says this is the natural evolution of things. This is a major technological breakthrough, and this is what's coming. Now, should we slow it down or try to moderate that change? Because it seems to me that in the interim, there's going to be a lot of braking that happens with no way out, towards the future. Because the question that keeps coming up on this podcast and others that I frequent is that if you put an entire class of people out of work, you're killing the economy. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. So what kind of sense does that make? And we still haven't gotten that answer. But it seems that we are all systems go on the implementation of agents. So much so, like Sam Altman has taken a more sober tone when it comes to jobs. There's a picture floating around online of a billboard, I think in San Francisco, in which it's advertising a new AI company, and it says something to the effect of, you don't need humans, don't hire humans. AI can do the job of humans, so call us at this number. So anyway, that billboard that poster was defaced eventually, which I think that trend will continue. So if these agents are as advertised and they get implemented over the next year or two, I think it makes sense to say, we're going to start seeing job loss. I mean, we've got some obvious anecdotal evidence, which we talked about on this podcast, of people losing their jobs at the hands of AI. But I think these agents will expedite that, and things will start to become more real. And, folks like Sam Altman say, hey, jobs are going to be created because of AI that we didn't have before. But if, what jobs will be created that AI can't do? I can't get my head around that. I don't know that he could provide an answer for that either. So I will say that my company just went through or is currently on the back end of a restructure, which is a alarming time at any corporation if you work at a corporation. I don't know why corporations can't get this right, but they always seem to implement this restructure towards the end of the year, right around the holidays, and naturally mine did this, made these announcements in late November, early December. So these people were let go, right before the holidays. So, I mean, that right there tells you about the lack of humanity involved in these decisions. And I get it. You've got to make these cuts before the end of the year. The time is not great. It sucks. But you think you work with these people who were let go, them, they talk about their families. This is a hard thing to hear about, let alone go through it. So, and I think that reality is going to be true for a lot of us in the near future. But let's not harp on that. I think we know that the future is uncertain as it relates to jobs. But a contention of mine is, what does the future look? What does the future look like? What I like about my job, other than I think work is inherently good for people to do. I know it's inherently good for me to do. I think it is for humanity as it gives us purpose in some way. Now, there's certainly some aspects of most jobs that can be eliminated that aren't necessary and don't give purpose. That I understand. But without work, once it goes away, what happens? Are we going to be just, I don't, we're going to have time to be creative, but I can't imagine people doing that, using all their time to be creative and do good and noble things. I think the opposite would be true. And moreover, what my job affords me is the ability to be independent. And if I can't work, if machines have replaced me outright, and there's no hope of me working and, earning capital, then I'm going to be dependent on some entity other than myself. And this is a change for the first time in history that we're going to go through in which people are fully dependent on, either the government or some technological company that's going to give you a share of their compute for you to survive on. And that means you're dependent on that entity. And I don't like that. The idea of being dependent on, I like the idea of being dependent on myself for my independence and autonomy. So, and that looks like it's going to go away. And who knows when that will be. But anyway, I'm not optimistic about it. I think as these agents take hold over the next year, we're going to see more and more evidence of these things we're talking about. In any case, keep your ear out for agents being rolled out at your companies. It may be through Microsoft Copilot. It may be through some other software. I don't know if it'll be advertised as agents. But when they have the ability to do what you do for a fraction of the cost, things are going to be starting to get real. But I don't want to, end it there. I mean, that was pretty depressing, I'll admit. I am optimistic. You heard Dario Amodei talk about scientific breakthroughs as it relates to health over the next year or two. I'm hopeful as a father. I've got a father with Parkinson's. I've talked about that before. So I'm hopeful that there are breakthroughs on that front. Anybody suffering with cancer, if you've ever known anybody, that would be tremendous. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. One other note is that I saw that Australia is implementing a ban on social media for kids under the age of 16 starting in 2025, which I think is tremendous. It'll be interesting to see how soon that follows suit elsewhere, if it does. Until then, I guess it's up to the parents to make those determinations. Okay, so I've got some questions that have been sort of hanging out for a few months from some listeners that I wanted to get to. First up is from Mac, and he's asking about what I listen to and what I read to stay current on AI. And to be truthful, I don't read a lot about, I mean, every now and then a book will come out on AI from someone I follow, and in those cases, I will get to, I'll get that book and read, probably not in its entirety, but portions of that book. But most of those books talk about technology in the past, and then they go to in some abstract vision of the future, in which they're talking about compounding computation and the reduction of cost and these things. So all those books are sort of the same, painting a potential horrible reality for the future or a potential great reality for the future. So those books are good, but I don't read a lot about AI in my spare time. Typically, I read what I like, which is, I'm a middle class man, so I like to read about war. So I'm reading that Vasily Grossman book. So, but honestly, the news happens on Twitter or X, and that's where I am. You can get in a tech bubble on Twitter, and most of my feed is that. And that's where I get my news. Folks link to papers there and articles, and that's how I find it. So, and that's just a high level overview. I mean, you can obviously get deeper into that, as deep as you want to get. So, but I would advise against it because you can really lose all your time focusing on, these things you can't control. So, and I think too that I think you'll notice that the frequency of this podcast has slowed down over the last 6 months, and that's for that reason. I've tried to take a step back from, learning about all things AI. To some extent, I think we know what the future is going to look like as AI gets more and more advanced. So I'm not, I try not to overanalyze it and just keep up with the major stories of the day. So hopefully that answers your question, Mac. This next question is from Sarah without an H, and it's essentially asking, what steps am I taking to insulate myself from a future without work? And honestly, there's, I don't know what steps you can take. I think I said earlier, Sam Altman talks a lot about AI creating jobs in the future, but the question is, what jobs is AI going to create that AI can't do? It's hard to wrap your mind around that. So we featured an article early on in this podcast about a guy who lost his job. Essentially, he was a freelancer of some sort, and generative AI, these large language models, sort of took over his work, and he lost his job. And in that article, I think it was in the New York Times, he said he's not going back to do a white-collar job. He was going to go to trade school to learn to be a plumber or an electrician. I'm not sure what it was or what it is, because he thought that those trades would be the most insulated against AI. So I've not done anything like that. I think that when these agents do take hold and people do start to lose their jobs en masse, a lot of people are going to do that exact same thing. And what happens when that happens is that it's a supply and demand issue. If your town has 3 plumbers and that happens and you've all of a sudden got 15 or 20 plumbers in that town, prices are going to plummet, right? So I think it's that's obviously good work. It's noble work. I don't know if that's the right choice. I don't know. I guess that's the biggest thing is you don't know. I don't know what to do. I know I've got work right now. And to some extent, I'm probably very spoiled in that I work a corporate job that's cushy in my trade, and I don't want to walk away from it. Honestly, I've developed a skill over the past 2 decades that I have, and it's a lot to just unplug and walk away after being in it that long. But, AI may force the issue. But again, even if we go, just like I said, if I go to a trade school and get a trade, how many other people are going to be doing that? So to answer your question, no, I've not really done anything to insulate myself. I guess I would say that I am investing in those technologies where I can in the market, not necessarily on any individual single stocks, but in mutual funds that focus on technologies. So I am doing that. So our last question was submitted by someone anonymously, and they were just really asking about the state of the podcast as the frequency of episodes has dropped down from 2 a month to 1 a month over the last half of the year. And I think that will remain the case for 2025. You can get them as far into this as you want, but me being non-technical, it's really a lot of conjecture. I focus on the news that's relative to this topic, but I don't want to go too deep into it. I mean, I'm just not in a place in my life where I want to spend that much time because it is an endeavor to do this podcast. So, if feedback states differently and there is a demand for it, then maybe we do that in the future. But right now I'm content. Like, I'm a father. Most of you know that. And I enjoy being a father and a husband. So I'm going to do those things. That's priority one for me. And this will be something we do, adjacent to my home life. And that's fine. And that's where we're at. So that is it for this episode. We'll be back sometime in 2025. I'm guessing late January, early February. So have a great new year. We'll talk next time.